Nigerians, the whole truth don finally come out. This man don expose Tinubu. The whole truth don finally come out about the update wey dey trend. The update wey dey trend about this our bishop and President Tinubu. This man don expose the whole truth. For the sake of peace, make we no allow President Tinubu or any APC supporter to see this video, because wey this man just tell Tinubu at the ending of this video no be wetin I would like make President Tinubu hear am, but make una share the video so that more Nigerians fit come lis ten to this particular video. See guys, just watch the video.
All right. So I'm sure you watched the P2B interview, but of course, what you may have also noticed was the response to some of the issues raised. It looks like the biggest talking point that quite a chunk of the national newspapers picked on was the issue that P2B said that he would have led from the front in that issue, would have stepped into the forest. I mean, help us put that in perspective regarding the symbolism of a commander-in-chief, showing what could have been done in a situation like that.
I think it's a very figurative and deep one. And leading to the front, in some cases, he might have intended in the literal sense, maybe out of his passion for humanism, his passion for human life. We recall there were moments during the era of His Excellency Goodluck Jonathan where he actually went to the battlefield, in that case to morally boost the confidence of soldiers. That could be an example, So whether or not he meant that in the literal sense, I mean, we can't tell. But figuratively speaking, the symbolism is what stuck out. And this is, giving context around the absence of communication between the presidency, His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and the governor of Oyo State for over 50 days, despite the incident. So the question then became whether or not the president did enough in action or even in communication. And those were some of the contexts that he was reacting to. And in the mind and in the eyes of the public, there were a lot to be said and to be seen that could have been done but weren't done. And even when after so many days they were able to get those people back, the circumstances around their rescue or release were still questionable or debatable.
Another big talking point will be the one-term resolve of P2B. He says that he will do just one term if elected. And the big question is that commitment something that's primarily political calculation, or is it something that, because we've seen that example before, it was former President Jonathan said they had agreement that he wouldn't run in 2015, but eventually he lost that election in 2015. So the argument is that people don't keep this gentleman agreements, but we understand that something has been signed and written between whoever. I mean, but some people still don't believe that P2B, if he wins, will do just one term.
I mean, his person is different from Goodluck Jonathan. And if we are to go by his track record, I don't see a reason why we should disbelieve him. He has demonstrated a commitment to abide by his words. And we know, for those who know P2B, his words are seriously taken by himself. There is an expression of his commitment. But the more important thing is really what that conveys to the seriousness and the urgency of the Nigerian system and our political posture at this time. And it's also a demonstration of one individual's self-sacrifice, for the general good. It also shows you he's committed to trust and political inclusion. And that's why he talks about respecting zoning arrangement. But of course, constitutionally speaking, if he goes for a first term, the Lord allows him to go for a second. And if he has willfully said he wouldn't want to run or return a second time, then the more pertinent question becomes about his resolve and how he intends to execute a plan that will bring this country back to the direction it ought to be. And I think that is where the focus ought to be. It is true there might have been some written pact as a token of that commitment, either within the party or within or between the individuals, himself and Atiku. But I think the more important question is, how would he accomplish this in 4 years? what are the measurable outcome, and being able to really convince Nigeria that if not all, but significant aspect of our problem will be turned around within that period. But more importantly, if this is executed and is able to achieve that, then it would have set a very important precedent, not just in Nigerian democracy, but in Africa as well.
So let's shift to what's now boiling up between the presidency and the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria. John Cardinal Onaico publicly recounted what they said was a private meeting. But we saw the details in the news. In fact, we saw the president saying that all is fair in politics in the news. But then the presidency feels that John Cardinal Onaico shouldn't have been discussing what they had a meeting with the president as a bishops' conference out there in public. And the question is, did he fulfill a moral duty to speak truth to power, or did he breach the confidentiality expected in high-level engagement? I mean, was there anything, did they sign up to talk after visiting the villa?
I think the more important question for the office of the presidency is whether or not some sort of confidentiality agreement was signed. And if it was, over what nature of information? Because the substance of that conversation really touches on the economic lives of Nigeria, the general concerns that is every day within the purview of the public. There was no conversation that touched on national security or anything sensitive of that nature, And so the point should not be so much about the manner of disclosure as much as it should be around the meat of the issues that were raised. And I feel like when you bring up these arguments, you then use it as an opportunity for political labeling, because the ultimate objective of all of that is to, cast aspersions, on the bishop and the cardinal, and also suggest political partisanship. And that's not necessarily the case. But key question, is even if we take for a moment that was supposed to be confidential, does it mean that, every discussion should be sacrosanct if there's a confidentiality agreement? Does it also mean that, for certain questions that involve existence of citizens, security, safety, those are not things that the cardinal can bring up to say this is what was discussed and this is how it impacts you. I don't really agree that those were privileged communications, because they touch on, general issues that we talk about every day. But even if we say there was an expectation informally, of confidentiality, then the question then becomes, if it's a question that touches on the public lives, our existence, then what is sensitive about it that should take it outside the purview of the public?
We'll dwell a little on this. In 2014, John Cardinal Onaico criticized former President Goodluck Jonathan, and it was music to the ears of those who are in power now. I mean, clearly, now that John Cardinal Onaico did not have complimentary words for them, it becomes a problem.
Yes.
I mean, what's the balance there?
I think it speaks about the posture of this administration towards feedback. It is okay to defend your policy, but a good leadership will require humility to also get response in terms of how that policy is impacting people. And I don't necessarily admire that or agree that it is appropriate to put up a defensive posture when concerns are being made. It is one thing to hear from your cabinet members that certain policies are being pushed, or maybe the economic posture is heading in the right direction, if that's the representation they make to him. But if you're getting feedback from the calibers of the Pope, who, from a symbolic standpoint represent truths, then that should be a very good sounding board for you to gauge how people perceive the progress you're making and the policies you're implementing. So that two-way front is essentially very important. Yes, you hear from your cabinet, macroeconomic indicators are improving, but at the same time, also be receptive to feedback from delegates who are also saying things are not really cascading into the livelihoods or income of the ordinary citizens.
Okay, let me just read what Daniel Bualia, one of the presidential spokespersons, had to say about John Cardinal Onaico. I think we'll have that. We can have it on the screen. Daniel Bualia's comments on X It says Cardinal Naiko wasn't speaking for Christians. He was speaking for Catholics, the very institutions rooting for P2B. In fact, likely the institution where P2B also said in 2022, take back your country, and so on and so forth. He said a lot of things. And he says, ironically, the same priest would rebuke their members if members said, we are suffering. I mean, just the point. They are accusing John Cardinal Naiko and the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria of supporting P2B.
Yes.
So that's how they pivoted the conversation.
Unfortunately, in my view, that's an instance or a classic example of political labeling. Like I said to you, the key point is, what is the substance or the merit of the issues or the concerns raised? What are your evidence or what are the actions, to negate the assertions that these people are making? And we must bear in mind, the Catholic or the bishops are individuals. They are entitled to their opinion. They might have their own political view, and what they stated in public media was basically their understanding and interpretation of the general concerns of Nigeria. There is no evidence or indication that they were endorsing any particular candidate at this time. And, to throw those kind of aspersions without backing, I feel like it's just a deviation from the substance of what was being raised and the point that was being made.
I mean, the issue, the presidency's accusation of abuse of clerical privilege against Onaiko represent a legitimate defense of institutional boundaries, or is it just an attempt to intimidate independent voices?
Yeah, but can we really agree or say that the conversation between the president and the delegation of bishop is a privileged communication in that setting, especially when they're talking about national economic matters or matters touching on the welfare of citizens, the credibility of the electoral process, and citing instances of his prior, democratic action? There is nothing sensitive. This is not a case of, you're making a confession, So when we talk about a breach of clerical privileges, that is not, exactly well-founded. We can't really say because these individuals are religious leaders, then they should have no say when it speaks to the dignity of the human persons. That statement or those conversations were not politically partisan in any way. They were just touching on general welfare issues, how the economy is touching people, how inclusive people feel, and the credibility of the institutions of government, including the electoral process. These are general societal conversations, except we are putting an argument where we are simply saying we are evolving to a society that suppresses the truth or suppresses a particular sect or religious group from airing opinion or communicating concerns. Then that's a different conversation entirely.
So at the end of the day, do you think, how should religious leaders balance their prophetic role of speaking uncomfortable truths with the diplomatic discretion required when engaging political authorities? I
mean, stating the truth is the most important moral responsibility everyone as individuals have. They're not to talk of, cardinals or bishops. They are symbols of truth and righteousness. And if they cannot demonstrate that even in uncomfortable situation, then, it casts, aspersions as to their credibility or the sanctity of their institutions. I think the more important question or consideration should really be helping the administration understand that receiving uncomfortable feedback is part of democracy. And it doesn't help when those feedbacks are uncomfortable, political labeling, and castigation or intimidation becomes the next recourse. Again, the most important thing is not so much about the manner of disclosure, your expectation around whether or not that conversation should have been disclosed. It's really about, was there merit or truth? And if you feel like it wasn't truthful, then put forward evidence and action to back it, either from a statistics standpoint or from a human index standpoint. That has not been done till today. The key issues have not been refuted. It is not sufficient for the president to declare that the economy is not bleeding or poverty was met or seen before, even though he isn't happy that most of the things he said were brought to the public. Maybe, he didn't want those things to go to the public, but that doesn't really matter. The most important thing is, what was your posture about it as a good leader? How did you listen? Did you take those feedback And did you address those in a reassuring manner? Those were missing. And so we have moved away from the merit and substance to start looking into technical questions that are not even applicable in the instance.
I mean, to what extent are the Catholic bishops' assessment that the country is bleeding and the presidency's claim of emerging from a dark tunnel irreconcilable, and which narrative better reflects measurable reality?
Pick any sector. Security. How many killings do we have? How do we feel, from a security? How safe do we feel? Has the killings reduced as compared to 4 years ago, 7 years ago? These are key index to look at. We are living in a society where almost every day there are reports of kidnapping. Almost every day. Look at the economy. Where was the cost of fuel 4 years ago? 193. Where is it today? These are important index. So when you're talking about current realities, the numbers are before us. The standard of living is clearly not improving. So this is not a question of a misrepresentation or misstated facts. Inflation continues to be a pain point for people. Household income hasn't increased. Purchasing power hasn't improved either. And that's why I said the focus of the presidency should have been more around assuring the public around improvements they have made, if any, to show that this society or this country is moving to the right direction, as opposed to casting aspersions on the individuals who are bringing the outcome of those conversations to the public. So realistically speaking, we are yet to see evidence or action that speaks to an improved state. It doesn't matter what sector you pick. There are no improving indexes that touches on human welfare that suggest an improvement.
So, does the intense focus on competing narratives about the state of the nation indicate a deeper crisis of shared facts in Nigeria public discourse?
It depends on how you look at it. I feel like there is a disconnect between the reality of the Nigerian society and the office of the presidency. Because the truth of the matter is, where you hear a president debunk everything that is being said as concerns without really listening, then it raises concerns. You could also hear the cardinal express his view around the people who are surrounding and advising the president. And he's thinking that they aren't actually confirming or adequately communicating the reality of what's on ground. We also saw this during the era of Buhari. So in that instance, there's certainly a disconnect between the public reality and public opinion vis-a-vis the administration and what they claim or report to the president as being the current state of the economy.
But do you believe that when someone assumes the role of a president or even a governor, that they stop hearing properly or they are cut off from reality?
No, I simply feel it's a function of who the individual has always been. Because if I use, there are viable leaders who, at every point in time, even whilst they were in power, they listened. We've had examples. So it is one thing hearing, it's another thing listening. It's all about what is the quality of the leadership associated with that administration or that individual. It is more important to listen. And listening means not only just hearing to take a defensive stand or to offer justification, but also explaining, taking feedback and reassuring and genuinely looking into the issues to build trust. And so I don't think that it's something really associated with the office, such that when you enter, you change all of a sudden. No, it's a function of that individual as a leader. And this is the reason why we urge people, when you decide candidacy in an election, you have to consider these qualities. And we're seeing increasingly situations where the demand for accountability is increasingly being labored. And that's what we see playing out between the presidency and issues of confidentiality. Since when do we talk about confidentiality in discussing governance matters? We are only asking for accountability. And that is what the cardinal was trying to emphasize. There is a disconnect between your administration and the welfare of the people. Can you explain it, or can you do better to show what direction is taken? But, they took it as an insult and uncomfortable. In some other material respects, some other leaders would interpret that as feedback to act upon and improve. There is no expectation that you solve every problem overnight. But sometimes what matters is how you respond to these issues as they come. If you're making improvement in security, explain it so people understand it. If you're having challenges, explain those challenges as well.
Thank you for watching that video. So guys, before you leave, look at it down here. Do well to subscribe and also put on notification bell so that whenever we upload any video in this great platform, you will be the first to see it. And please don't forget to drop your comment at the comment section what you think about this video, your opinion as well. See guys, this is where I'm going to end the video, and I will see you guys some other time.